Welcome back to Turn Down for What, your source for EV news and updates. Like and subscribe for more content like this episode. Let's dive on in. Welcome back to Turn Down for What. Another day,
Another Christmas episode.
Christmas episode. Here we go. Well,
We're all
obviously
festive. Well, two of us are festive. One of us had to be a professional.
is
Neither.
just I'm just at work today. I don't even have meetings. I'm just at work today.
Uh,
But I didn't think to put on my Christmas sweater, which I guess I should have because that is apparent tis the season. But I did wear my Christmas pajamas last night, so I guess I get some creds out there. But anyways, there's an image that nobody ever wants to see. Uh, uh, but yeah, entering into this Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, I wanted to hop on and be able to kind of share some Christmas Eve cheer with all of our good listeners who've been so loyally faithful to listening to our channel all year long. And those new ones, welcome aboard. Um,
Absolutely.
Couple topics that we kind of just wanted to bring up today in the light of Christmas cheer. Chris Bow is feeling specifically cheerful about his Ford F-150 Lightning, and we were going to discuss the ongoing
Uh,
cheer that he feels in this season. We'll kind of start there.
well, the Grinch has stolen my EV Christmas for the second year in a row. Yeah, at Christmas season, it is in the shop. God, love that. This is like the big struggle, man. Is it's I've always tried to share and be transparent about it. It's had its share of problems, and this time, 12 volt issues came back up again. Started during our road trip down to Southern California and back. Started hearing some weird sounds and getting some weird alerts on the sensors, like the ADAS sensors, the cameras, the backup sensors, and then it would go away. I didn't think much of it, and I was like, I'll bring it in. I'll bring it in after New Year's because I didn't want it to sit in there during the holiday. And then I went out on a rainy day to go uh, and look at the truck because a coworker had sent me a picture where one headlight was on, just one headlight. Uh, and I reached out to our buddy Martin Meek, who said, "Hey, I've seen that before in an older Ford, where if the headlight shorts out, that headlight turns on, and it's check out your headlight." And so I go out there and try to start up the truck, and a whole bunch of just every possible error comes up, man. Every single front end of the truck, like the back end still worked, the tailgate still went up and down, and but the whole front end was done. I mean, no frunk, no sensors, wouldn't start, was in accessory mode, a whole hot mess. Ford couldn't see me that afternoon, so I just waited. Um, and I honestly thought I did a post. I did a post where I was like, "Hey, I'm going to remove the 12 volt battery like I did before." I thought it would just reset itself, and this time it did not. That post kind of blew up. I only posted it on X, but how X sometimes does. It went all crazy, and next thing you know, Ford's reaching out to me, and they had one of their crafty Christmas elves go in and do some engineering magic and put it into a mode that at least allowed me to start it up again. They pulled the logs from it. I was able to then drive it to the dealer instead of getting it towed. They went in and they did find water intrusion in the battery junction box, which again, thanks to our good friend Martin Meek, when I sent him the part number, it's just a fancy way of saying the fuse box. Sounded much more serious when they were like, "Oh, the battery junction box," and I'm like, "Oh, this is scary."
I was
It's
like, the
just the
car's
fuse
about to
box.
explode. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, yeah. So shout out Martin, man. He was just awesome and was kind of walking me through, what it was. And they did find a bad accelerator pedal, which was causing some of the weird noises and stuff and that I was experiencing. So they're going to replace the accelerator pedal, the fuse box, and so yeah, I'm in a gas F-150 and STX, which another post on X I put how I was just amazed by. Um, when you get inside of it, it's not all that different than like a Lightning XLT, cloth seats, kind of, some manual adjustments and things, but you feel just like you should in an F-150, which is one of the great things about the Lightning, man. It just felt right. And I'd been driving my wife's car for a couple days until I got that loaner from Ford. I'm in that car, and it brought back everything that I just didn't like about smaller cars, and that I loved about the Lightning. As soon as I got into even the gas F-150, this is a hybrid one. I was like, yeah, this is what I belong in. I belong in a truck. Um, And it got 700 miles of range, man, just driving around the city. Like on the highway, it would do close to 900, and I posted about that. And that got 75,000 views on X. It went crazy. All these different, some people didn't know. I didn't expect a bunch of people, 75,000 people to see it. So I got a bunch of people on both sides coming in with rhetoric and cliche and like, do you drive 700 miles and how big's your bladder and do you wear Depends and all these kind of, all the EV stuff that people getting self-defensive, not knowing that I own an EV and have solar and charge and have traveled in an EV and they're, educating me. And I'm like, oh man, can you at least click on my profile, look and see who I am before you freak out and think that I don't know what the heck, so yeah, I did make a video about that. I haven't posted it yet, but I'm gonna. I just posted my last part 2 of my road trip. So later this week, after Christmas, I'll post the one about the gas F-150 and just why I think like it just reminded me, because I haven't been in a gas F-150 since 2008, and it's come a long way in terms of its efficiency. I was getting 14 miles to the gallon in that, and maybe 400 miles of range in it, and this STX man is just it's amazing. I was just talking to our buddy Martin, who was just towing and picking up a hot tub, and the dude was getting like zero point 0.7 miles per kilowatt hour towing. And come on, you can absolutely see why having 700 miles of range, towing for 400 miles would be a benefit. And so I talk about that. I talk about that and why I made that post and that it wasn't to have EV hate. And I don't tow. My range is perfect in my standard range for the most part. But it was definitely just a reminder. It's a reminder of what we face, and I just point out the idea, and my wife talks about this too, about transitioning to EV. She doesn't want to think about the stuff that we think about. When I made that road trip, I had to think about how far can I go on the first charge at 100% versus all the ones after? What's the wind going to be? What's the elevation change between my house in the Central Valley, from the Central Valley up over the Grapevine into Southern California? When it was raining, that was an impact. When it was cold in the morning, that was an impact. All these things you got to think about. Even charge stops, right? Like, so we came up the California coast rather than come back up I-5, which was a much more fun thing to do coming up to Solvang, because we left Disneyland so late that had we gone up I-5, one of the charging stops I had picked in Tajon, the bathrooms would have been closed. So you have to think about these types of things. I could charge and then go to a gas station, but again, when you're in a gas vehicle with that much range, you dictate where you stop, when, and why. In my standard range Lightning and Model Ys and some of the other ones, and I know that there's others that get 400 miles of range, Lucids and long range Model 3s and stuff. But the car is dictating where you stop, and you have to research the charging station. How reliable is it? What amenities are next to it? Does it have a bathroom? There were charging stops I looked at on the map, and there was nothing around it. So I'm like, well, I can't stop there. That means I either need to slow down to get to the next one or stop early to get to this one, which may add a stop to the next one, depending on the range and the temperature. You don't have to think about that if you got 700 miles of range. So the point isn't you're going to go 700 miles. The point is, with that much range, you don't care about any of those other things.
And the other side of that coin is obviously the frequency. I mean, a gas station, there's going to be a lot more choices of where you stop to get gas off every exit,
Yep.
rather than, 100 miles apart. And that's one of the things that, I mean, we've talked about. And one of the reasons that Jesse and I did Power Up in general was to help fill in those gaps with some of the funding. But the reason and the onset for why we started Power Up really came back to the story of me taking I wasn't going to Disneyland, I was going to Disney World from my house in East Tennessee, driving to Florida, but getting to experience those charging deserts, which was a lot more frequent at the time. You're on a CCS network where, okay, after 150 miles, here's your first stop. You have to stop there because the next one's 100 miles away and it's full or it's pouring rain. And there's, like you said, there's no restrooms, or the restrooms are 300 yards away. And there's all these considerations, to solve the issue. One, you need frequency of charging stations. So a lot more availability, which obviously I think the funding allocations that are out there will help supply. That's one of the reasons that we're doing Power Up. Secondarily, looking at the amenities that are attached to the charging station itself, like you said, I mean, making sure that they're either close proximity to ones, or they're more frequent. They're frequent enough to where you can be selective. But three, I think, like you were kind of just alluding to, there is, and we've said this a dozen times, but there's this understanding that there's this yin and yang between the gas powered and the EV space where they coexist. It's not all one or all the other. I think that there's a use case for both. My truck before I bought my Lightning was an STX F-150, that exact trim model. Now I didn't have
That's
the
awesome.
extended range. I didn't have
Funny.
the extended range tank.
Yeah.
But it was
36
all,
gallons.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was all the same features on the 24-gallon tank. So I would get
Yeah.
450 miles and not 800, 900, whatever. But at the same time, like, that was my daily driver. And the reason I went EV was because I was spending $700 a month on gas
Yeah.
and I got to save all that money with my EV. It's a fast, cool, quiet vehicle. And for me and my lifestyle and for what I do, it's not an inconvenience. However, like I've said, I think I said this last week, my wife drives a Chevy Tahoe. Uh, it's something that, like,
Yeah.
our family and our current status of things is not to be a 100% EV household yet, with charging station availability and otherwise. I'm taking my family after the new year. We're going on a road trip to Florida. Well, doing that with kids and charging stops with the gaps and the funding not out yet, that's a really tricky thing to do with a 2-year old, a 5-year old, and a 7-year old. And so that's something that in our stage of life right now, that doesn't make a ton of sense, because, we don't have the infrastructure or the vehicle range that's in place to really be able to take the distance. And so
Yeah.
it is one of those things where there's a healthy conversation and a balance between the two that is, hey, yes, EVs have their place. I love my EV. I wouldn't do any. I would never. For me myself, I would love to drive an EV, as long as I'm driving. But at the same time, there is that understanding that there's that balance between that and the use case for gas, because an 800-mile gas powered vehicle can tow much better. Maybe this Silverado with those huge ranges, but then the cost efficiency of
Yep.
energy and stuff matters when you're dealing with that large of a battery and that efficiency and the cold and all of these variables. I mean, all those things, you have to study that for your life and see what makes the most sense.
And look, you can do that trip with your family. You can absolutely do it to Florida. You can get there. If you want to do
Absolutely.
it in an EV, you can do it.
Absolutely.
But this, and I said this too about that post, man, is like, this is not about me and you, Kyle Connor, Brandon Flash, Zach, who drives his Model 3 and now Cybertruck all over the place. It's not about Tesla Tino and Bearded Tesla who drive it all over. Right? It's not about those guys. We've got those guys. Those guys were early into the infrastructure and into the ecosystem. This is about Bill, my neighbor, who drives the Ram, and this is about Sophie, the friend of my wife, who drives a Honda, and they don't have to think about these things you would need to think about in an EV. This isn't about getting us. This is about how do we get to the next level and why are things why my specific point is, why are we selling 750,000 F-150s and 30,000 Lightnings? Why? Because the Lightning's a great EV, man. It rides so smooth, so quiet, it's so comfortable. It's a lot of the features that this STX has, and then elevated to the next level for 10 grand more. Why isn't it flying off the shelves with this demographic? And it is price per value. If I can get 700 plus miles more on the highway for 50 grand or less, I mean, that initial, it's hard without having to think about anything. That is, I think, a big deal. And I just got me thinking, because my truck's in the shop. I started looking at like Honda Prologue leases, started looking at options, man. I started looking at Tesla's got some leases. My sister has a BMW iX that I checked out. She brought over. Let me see. I did some video stuff on that. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to edit that together because it started to rain. I was meaning to talk to my sister and my brother-in-law about why they switched from a Model X to the BMW, and I didn't get to have that conversation, so I'm not sure if I'm going to get that video together or not. But I drove the BMW and checked that out. And what was crazy is coming out of it, it just got me into this place of the Lightning is still the best vehicle, man. Like, I checked out the Prologue. It's fine, right? It's fine. The BMW, great, but zero frunk at all. You can't even open the dang thing. Charge ports on the wrong side in place. It's like back passenger. Why? What am I supposed to do with that? Um, yeah, and it's, comfortable, quiet, quick, smooth, a bunch of weird little things in there like sounds when you would change different modes, it would change sounds. It had massaging seats that were nice. Fine. I still didn't feel it as just right as I did in that Lightning. And so it's a struggle for me, man, because going forward, how am I going to have faith in this vehicle to get me anywhere? My wife, to your point, doesn't want to take it on a trip that we were planning to take to Arizona now. Um, and yeah, man, it's like I'm just torn. I'm torn. So this is where the EV industry has to step up and do better.
Well, and I
So
think the studies show that too. I mean, recently there was a study that came out. I don't remember exactly which one it is, but it showed people who own a certain vehicle, would they buy it again? Well, the number one obviously is the Chevy Corvette. Everybody knows that if you have a Corvette, especially the newest
you're a
ones right
Corvette
now, are
guy.
just unbelievably great cars. But then you had Rivian. Then it was a couple, then another Rivian, then a
Love
couple
their
others, and
Rivians.
then you had the Kia. So people who buy an EV, most of the time they would buy another EV. Regardless of the situations that we have, I think even with the 300-mile range, the next vehicle we get probably between the three of us will be an EV. And at least I wasn't an EV person before this. I know Josh didn't have an EV before this, but the benefits to us outweigh the negatives at this point. Now you're getting also into where our company come in to fit the gaps in between. Now, we were talking about DC fast charging at that point, 400 kilowatts. Again, our stations are going to be designed for Josh and myself. They're going to be pull through design because we want to have a way to charge with a trailer. They're going to be the ability of 400 kilowatts because the Chevy Silverado we took to Kim Power, that truck was able to charge at 360, 365 when we
Great
started
charging.
charging. A great charging session with that equipment. So we know that's necessary in the future of the industry. We're going to have covers because who likes to be out in the snow or rain? And I don't want grandma out there trying to do that in the rain either. So we're trying to think of what is the best results that we could have as EV people. But then you get into level two. We're having an argument with strategy right now for what a level two network even would look like. So we've got equipment that is about 3 times more expensive than a four head level two. Do we go with four 19.2 kilowatt systems, or do we go 3 times as much and put in 100 kilowatt system that can be divided by four? That if you're charging, you could charge at 100, or if you have four cars, you're charging at 25 kilowatts. Those are the kind of questions we're asking now. What is better for the community? I can upgrade the other one to 200 kilowatts with a couple modules and be fine. But would I rather have that, or would I rather have more level fours spread out through these charging deserts? Because there's a couple grants coming up in our region that we're going to have to make that choice. And I don't know which way to go because it's kind of a hard thing to kind of judge.
And I mean, I think when you deal with these rural communities, they don't have anything. And so you're supplying a both and solution. But, I think one of the largest barriers to adoption that we've seen is, like this has been a repeated theme, but the cost of the
Cost.
entry is obviously a big gap, which I mean, I think they're trying to work on with getting lines and production and things centralized. But then the charging availability itself is a scary thing. I was hesitant to buy my truck because of that variable, but I knew most of my driving would be around town. I decided to take it to Florida with the expectation of it may be interesting, but let's see what it was like. And that's really what promoted, my interest in the space. But it's something that in this grand scheme of things, like Jesse's saying, grandma doesn't want to buy an EV, even if it does make more sense, because that's a very scary thing to not know with charging, to not be able to calculate the cold weather and how that affects you. And so there's a lot of pieces in that really need to make sense. And then the second part of that is Jesse kind of hinted to it. I think the technology for these vehicles is improving, where the confidence can and the experience can be improved. If I was to build today a perfect vehicle for me, and maybe we have a whole episode called "What Does a Perfect EV Look Like?"
Yeah.
But if I was to build a perfect EV for myself, it would be my F-150 Lightning, maybe with a little bit more bells and whistles. I would get a 350 to 375 mile range. I don't need a 600-mile range on my truck, just a little bit more. But then Jesse and I took a road trip last week. We took my truck to Nashville and back. It was a little bit colder, so the range was affected. The only thing that really mattered, I think, in our road trip was the fact that we don't have the 800-volt architecture. We were talking about, we were
Yeah.
discussing it. I don't need a 250 kilowatt battery pack. I want the same size battery pack, but I want to be able to charge it twice as quick. Because we went inside Bucky's and came back out. And when we had gotten back out, we had received enough charge to get to our destination, but we could have been all the way back up to 80% if we were getting those higher charging speeds. And so the
I'm a little
answer may
torn
not.
though. I'm a little torn though on that because the big thing, the big savior for my driving experience with an EV was the Tesla supercharging network, which can't support those high voltage charging anyway. Like I
That's
know
why you
your
charge
chargers
it.
will,
That's why you charge at Power Up America. I mean,
but you guys are in the next
Yes.
year. I'm not going to be able to charge there, and
but
beyond that, out in California,
Tesla's V5 charger, which they'll start to roll out, will have
V4.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
Isn't it
V
V5 that's the 500 kilowatt?
No,
Or is
it's
it
so you
V4?
got it's V4 dispensers are out there, but the cabinets are coming out
Yeah.
that haven't been released yet. And they did a really smart thing, as Tesla always does. They're about scale. And so what they really smartly did was they took their megawatt charging and made it it's the version 4 dispenser. And so that one cabinet can either charge the megawatt, Tesla was it semi, or it can split and charge
which is
the
what
charging at it.
which is what our charging systems will
Identical
do.
to what we were doing.
Uh,
Yeah.
It's
right?
all about
So
the power cabinets that they have at these stations are capable of delivering higher speeds. The
Yeah.
issue you have at a Tesla charger, which is one of the reasons that their equipment has worked to date, is it's a short cable and it's a low amperage cable, and it's designed to meet the current Tesla models.
Yes.
But you
Yes.
can't plug a Tesla Cybertruck up and get true like
No.
max potential unless you're on those new chargers. Because if you think
Correct.
about it in a realm of, you're sitting here with a huge water tank but a tiny water hose, and so there's not enough water to come out of the hose to drain that tank quick enough. And
Yep.
so a lot of times these power cabinets are capable, but those cables are the issue. And so they either need to be liquid cooled and capable of delivering higher charging speeds, or they're just a much thicker cable that can handle that. But that's something that, like a Cybertruck can't really fully charge at a traditional Tesla charging station to its fullest capability because it has that 800 volt
Yeah.
architecture. But if you look at what the industry needs to look like in the future, you're right, Chris. A lot of the current charging network can't meet that need. But if you had it, you're going to get that max. You'll get a boost charge over that 400 volt level. Then it's obviously going to diminish itself. But the newer charging station and the charging station of the future, if you think about my truck model going to a 800 volt architecture stop and charging, I would be able to charge, instead of a 40-minute session, it would be more like a 20 to 25-minute session.
It's a huge deal.
Which
Yeah.
is a huge deal to get back on the road. And like we've had this discussion, and Jim Farley talking about the bladder size and the range. I don't have to have a 600-mile range. I like to get out of the car every couple hundred miles and stretch my legs, but I don't want to have to get out of the car every couple hundred miles and stop for an hour. And
Yeah.
so if that charging stop can be 20 minutes and I can be in and out the door and ready to go, then I'm great. Because most times when you stop for gas, people don't realize this. They're at that gas station for 15 to 20 minutes. It's not usually just a pump, hot right back in the car and hit the road, maybe. But I know when I stop, it's most of the times a 20-minute stop. If you go to Bucky's, no matter who stops, it's a half hour to 45-minute stop. But that's where, those type of amenities, it's not necessarily about having a 600, 700-mile range. Now for towing, if your perfect vehicle is a tower, then you might need some of those other features. But for the average driver that's driving that Tesla or that's driving that F-150 Lightning, for just for the size of the vehicle, the Rivian SUV, the Cadillac Escalade, all those things, I don't think you need that 250 kilowatt mega battery, because that comes with lack of efficiency, which means it costs more to drive, and two, that larger battery takes longer to fill, which then even with 800 volt architecture, it still would take a long time because it's more battery to fill. And so I think that Lightning, like Ford was saying that their goal is not to have that 500-mile range, I think, or that 200 kilowatt battery pack, that is. I think that is the appropriate niche. You just have to figure out, how do you get 350-mile true delivered range, but also 800 volt architecture. That way you could charge it quicker, have reliable charging stations around. And I think in an affordable vehicle, because you can't go 250 kilowatt battery currently and be anywhere near affordable. And so you have to keep those battery packs down to have that affordability.
There's the rub, man, is that you kind of bring it all together there. I mean, you talked about how your STX got 450 miles versus the one that I'm currently borrowing, 800 plus miles. It needs to be like that with battery technology, where you do have, for the folks that don't need it and don't tow, 400 miles is fine. My current one only goes 200 basically on the highway, less than that. Um, and so we need to get to the solid state. We need to get to where you have a model where the minimum is near 400 miles. Again, not because your bladder is that big, but so that you can dictate where you stop and not the vehicle. It's more about that than it is the bladder. And then you can, if you need to tow, have that bigger tank, so to speak. And then, you talked about cost. Well, we just talked this morning, Josh. I mean, I think it was you or was it Jesse that shared the news that Ford is sending out to their dealers like, hey, we haven't qualified yet for 2025 tax qualifications. So that's a huge hit, man. Guys, we've got, a week to go to get that tax credit, and maybe it'll come back in 25 because there's a lot of moving pieces in there, man. They didn't release a lot of details, which Ford is not known to be very transparent, unfortunately. Um, and I think what it is, if you recall in 24, Mach-E lost their tax credit entirely because those batteries come from Poland, and they met the requirements in 2023 because Poland is a favored country that we deal with, but the components within that battery still didn't qualify, and the percentages of manufacture didn't qualify. So Mach-E lost it in 24. It's supposed to actually get it back at some point in 25. They're moving battery production. They talked about this in the last shareholder meeting from Poland back to Michigan. To get back some of that Mach-E pricing discount from the tax credit, and also because they get credits for building manufacturing in Michigan. So there's a bunch of reasons that they're doing that, and it's supposed to lower the price, the price and the cost of building the Mach-E. So like that's really positive. But that all hasn't happened yet. They're not being built in Michigan yet. They haven't submitted the paperwork to qualify, and I think they're still coming from Poland, so they don't qualify yet. For the F-150 Lightning, that was a big surprise, and I think it has to do again with those standards go up each year. So they still met the standards in 24. They're going up to another level in 25. They have to submit that paperwork and get it approved. Will they get it? Will they not? They think they will, but until they do, they don't want to promise somebody something that's not guaranteed. There's a lot of unknown.
The question is, if you get it, then will the government hack the whole thing apart anyways?
Right.
How long
Yeah.
is it going to last?
How long is it going to last? Yeah.
And I think one of the big things that I learned when I was looking into this stuff is graphite. Graphite's the big thing that almost 100% of graphite for the purposes of making batteries comes from China. So even if your pack is manufactured, and Ford by this point originally, remember, was supposed to have the Tennessee plant ramping up, was supposed to have the Kentucky battery plants by now ramping up. 26 was supposed to be the year. Or no, I'm sorry, 25 was supposed to be the year. Now it's 26, 27. And so all this stuff originally was on pace so that when this happened, Tennessee and Kentucky would be ramping up. It's not the case anymore. So all these things coming together for that cost of that 7,500 is a big deal for a lot of people. People like my family couldn't have afforded it without that 7,500. And when the R2 comes out, I'm not sure we can afford it without the 7,500. So that's another big part of it, man. I'm curious to see where that goes. I think I'd love to hear more from Ford. Hopefully more to come, because I think that was a leaked, dealer communication, not an official communication from Ford. So I'm sure we'll learn more, and hopefully a few months in, that will qualify. That happened last year too, if you remember, right? They had the list, then the list slowly got bigger. I don't even think Cybertruck is on that list yet. They haven't submitted, and it's not that it won't be necessarily; it's that they haven't submitted that paperwork.
Not yet, yeah. And I mean, as the new year approaches with the holidays, you can't be starting to do something after the new year without that guidance, because I mean that's misdirecting people. So they may have to pivot early year to understand what that looks like, but that's something that the tax credit needs to make sense. And to your point, just before you go, Jesse, the whole conversation around the tax credit comes from the fact that these vehicles are too expensive in the first place. And so we have to figure out, like, I think when you have the battery facility in Kentucky and Blue Oval open in Memphis, maybe there's a better chance that Ford, because I think that they're taking this smart play where they're really strategizing the launch of their EVs, and they're not just going willy-nilly into new models. You've seen them pull back, but they're not backing away from EVs. They're being strategic with their EV play. And I do think that there's an element here where they're going to, there was an announcement that Farley made. I think I sent it to Jesse. I might have sent it to both of you, where he was, I think he had said kind of off to the side that his next vehicle was going to be a rival cost to the Chinese competitors. And that's something that, like, we have to have competitive pricing because, you can only, if EVs are going to be 100 grand, it's never going to thrive in the marketplace
Yeah.
because if you can buy a vehicle for $30,000, $40,000 that will get you the range, the functionality, you have to have competitive EV pricing. And if they don't figure that piece out, and the only way to do it is to import BYD, then the EV market will never thrive. These U.S. based auto manufacturers are going to tank. We have to have
I
affordable vehicles where the $7,500 tax credit would not be necessary to make it make sense. And I did save $700 a month on gas for me, and so without the tax credit comparative to the equal trim model of my F-150, it was a good return of investment. But that's not to say the average person can justify the exact same thing. You need apples to apples the same. And then the second thing I was going to say is we need battery chemistry to improve in the US to where northern states aren't so affected by the cold.
Yep.
Because, Florida is a terrific state and California is a terrific state and Texas is a terrific state for EV adoption. And
Yeah.
I think one variable that's pretty consistent across the board is the warmth. Georgia is a close follow up to that.
Yeah.
And, yes, you can drive an EV in New York, but we need battery chemistry and battery technology to improve to where my truck, when I got in this morning, at a 90% fills advertising like a 200-mile range because, on my 320-mile truck because it's 20 degrees outside. And so,
Yep.
like, that's something where I can't take a road trip comfortably. My efficiency's dipped. The preconditioning doesn't work that well when it comes to that cold of a temperature. And so the further north you get, the harder it becomes with that battery technology.
Well, and again, the preconditioning is just for the, cabin air is what it does. So it really has
And the
no effect
battery.
on that. And a little bit on the battery
Better
for
too.
charging.
But I will say that I'll bring that kind of going back to the conversation though, about the differences of EV and gas too, though, right? So, okay, when you fill up your gas tank, you get 100% of what you paid for into your gas tank. And your example there of preconditioning, right? So I know it's going to be cold. I did this for my trip to Southern California, California cold, which was like 41 degrees. So not cold by, yeah, I know, right? Chilly, ooh. But I did plug in the truck overnight and I made sure it was at 100%. It preconditioned the cabin temperature so that the heater didn't have to be on for the kids. And it did precondition the battery pack. But all of that is energy that it's taking, right? That you're not accounting for. And then even when you go and charge it at the DC chargers, it's still going to have to output more than actually makes it to the battery. There are losses involved there that you're paying for. And so those types of things complicate stuff. And that's why the solid state right now has this whole thing. If you look into it, I'm not going to get too nerdy, but dendrites happen and they can only charge them so many times before they degrade and the technology's not there for solid state. But a lot of these things start to go away if they can mass manufacture and solve these problems still with solid state. And I think in the meantime, we're in this weird point now where, to your point, the Chinese are making some incredible cars with the voltages you're talking about, Josh, and they're doing it in Mexico and they're doing it all over China and all over Europe. And I don't think Americans are taking this seriously. I got into a really good conversation on X with someone, this is a friend of ours, Eric, who was like, "Hey, why are we doing protectionist stuff? The big three should have to compete. Let's get the Chinese in here. Let's have choice." I get that sentiment, but man, I'm scared the hell out of the Chinese come in today and they crush us, man. And we need time for these battery plants to come up. We need time for R2 to be manufactured.
You'll see
That
a lot
Georgia
of
plant.
you'll see a lot of Nissan 2.0s across the US OEMs.
Hey, here's the thing though with those companies is we need Lucid to get to the midsize. Tesla will be fine, right? But that's all that's going to exist. Stellantis is a joke already. Chrysler Chrysler GM is got a bunch of different versions, but they're not going to compete on price with the Chinese. Ford, God help them, if they don't get this right with Tennessee and the Kentucky plants, they're in trouble. But again, that's 2 years away. We need time for that. It's crazy. If I just don't think we can unleash the Chinese into our market right now. And I think if you only have to go look at China and look at Europe and look at what's selling in Mexico right now to see what would happen. And it's funny you mentioned Nissan because Honda just announced that they are going to merge with Nissan and Mitsubishi because Nissan and Mitsubishi have gotten crushed in their Chinese investments in markets. They're done. And VW, right? They had to reach out to Rivian and buy Rivian's tech, zonal architecture software because they're struggling and they're shutting down like 2 or 3 plants in Germany. Big uproar over that. I'm telling you, this is one of these topics that people want to be in denial about. And if we lose American automotive manufacturing to China, which we will if we open those floodgates right now, before these other companies get a chance to just, you know, get in a position, I think we're in deep trouble, man. And so,
Josh West has said it a few times. Traditional OEMs are dead, and these technological companies like Tesla are winning on a lot more than just their
yeah,
cars. But I do think that the new administration is going to prevent Chinese infiltration without significant tariffs and things. I do feel like there's going to be some regulations there to help slow
not
down that introduction, which I think that the current administration also was doing. But that's something
correct.
that the OEMs locally have to figure it out, because if they don't quickly, they can disappear off the map, because if you don't change or adapt, you die. And in the OEM market, that there's got to be that adaptation, because even you're seeing like Nissan didn't have an EV entry. We're talking beyond just EVs. We're talking about a vehicle in general. If you don't adapt, you die. And
Well, they
Nissan
had
is
the Leaf, one of the biggest. So
yeah. But I mean, that's not their course. That's not the reason that
But
they're
they
going bankrupt.
they didn't
And
keep up though, right? Still on
yeah,
Chatamo, still a small vehicle that the American market largely won't buy in mass.
yeah,
Great EV, right? A real pioneer out there,
looks
but they
good
haven't
too.
evolved
New
it.
ones.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with the Leaf, dude, but it's not, I'm never going to buy a Leaf. My wife
Well,
and our family's not going to get a Leaf.
I'm
There's
never going to install a Chatamo charger. So, it is
never.
what it
well,
is.
and
Hey,
here's one thing I kept looking at when it came to the $7,500 tax credit that'll probably be going away, which also might mean that these things that the Ford's doing is in preparation for that going away. Is that's a very good lease agreement on a $30,000 car for 2 years. We did see some of the YouTubers out there show where they could lease a car for a very low amount of money for 2 years. And my thing is, how do you get the communities that can't afford 80,000 cars into the charging network and let them charge for free? And I keep thinking to myself, if you could have took that same deal, $7,500 tax credit on, say, a Nissan Leaf, and now you have kids in high school, your junior and senior year, that you can give them a car that's brand new and safe. They can drive back and forth to school, even charge it at school for free. They're using that tax credit. They're buying the vehicle
great
from a
car for
Tennessee
kids.
company. I
Yeah.
think that is kind of the price point, but you have to have it so low in cost. And that's what Build Your Dreams is doing, because their lowest was like a $16,000 hatchback that got 240-mile range, and it's $16,000, even
My
if you
And
first
it's not
double the
vehicle,
just
tariff.
my first vehicle as a broke college kid was a $17,000 brand new Ford Focus. And I'm 6'6", and I had to sit in the back seat to drive the car. But I mean, I wasn't looking for what's the most efficient vehicle. I was looking for what could I get that I could get warranties on that was cheap. And 17,000 Ford Focus, brand new off the lot, was what I got.
how
Uh,
many people started with the Ford Focus? The mine was the Ford Escort, was my first new vehicle. I had a Dodge, my original one that I rebuilt in high school, but after that, my first new to me vehicle was the Ford Escort. But it's not just about price, man. I've been watching these. Kyle's got a couple. He's doing on his channel with the Chinese cars. There's a guy that I watch that's out of China. He's an American based out of China. I watch a lot of those reviews to see him. What they are, it's not just the price. It's that for the price, what they're delivering is sick, man. I mean, it's crazy charging speeds. It's luxury in the cabin. It's lay flat seats. It is stuff that is like not only cheaper than us, but at the next level to us. And there are some great, interesting deals, especially in places like Colorado. Dude, you can go get a Mini essentially for free. It is, you pay the taxes in Colorado, and because of all these things we're talking about, you can literally walk out the door with a free Mini, and all you're paying is the taxes because of these incentives. So
there's
you
got
can
to
find
be
the,
there's got to be an incentive-free way to buy vehicles. I mean, you have to get the cost down to
we
where it
got to
makes
get it there.
sense. I mean,
Yeah.
because Colorado, those prices are because the state is giving you a credit, the feds are
And
giving
they're
you
layering it.
credit, and
Yeah,
and
yeah,
th-
yeah.
and that's just dollars have to come from somewhere. They're not just appearing. These states are reallocating funds and using their state taxpayer dollars towards some of these incentives, and that's a band-aid on the boo-boo, but that doesn't fix the problem. And
Yeah.
that's where maybe we were talking about some of the funding that's in place that the Biden administration had put into place and what Trump might be doing with it, and they're looking at potentially reallocating some of those funds to the sourcing of battery materials, potentially within the U.S. And maybe that's the solution. Maybe importing all these parts and goods and graphite and things that you're talking about. Maybe that's part of the reason that we can't make an affordable EV is because we can't
All
make.
rumors, of course.
Of course, but I mean,
Yeah.
what if we were able to harvest our own materials? And what's the implication of that? I mean, there's a lot to discuss down that vein, but the question becomes, how do you make it to where because if you look at an EV, it's a lot more technically simple than a gas powered vehicle with all the different moving parts. The issue is the battery's too expensive. If the battery cost comes down, the vehicle's an affordable vehicle. So it all comes down to the battery. How do you get that battery cost down? And the question is, do you have to import from other, like Maki's doing it out of Poland, or can you get the materials and source it yourself to make an affordable battery locally? Because that's why China has such a good EVs, because they mine all their own materials, they do it in quantity, and they have a really cheap battery pack so they can make all these affordable EVs. We're in a position where we have to import our materials. There's not a true American made battery because we can't mine our own materials. So how does that affect the EV market in general?
Well, I think one of the tough things, though, is we talk about the politics of it, because in China, and I'm not advocating for Chinese communism by any stretch.
This is the second time you've had to say this.
I have had to say it. I have had to, because people get crazy in the comments sometimes. But the fact that they have a government that says, here's what we're doing, here's where we're going, this is what it's going to be, and you know that you've got 10, 20 years that's the path. And here we're in a month from now, on January 23rd, we don't know what executive orders are going to come. We don't know how they're going to change different aspects of it. And so if you're an OEM, that's really hard to know what to invest in. And then the OEMs themselves, of course, delay. You layer those things together, and I'm just torn, because I do think we need a date. I think we need a date that says 2030, whatever that is, right? I'm not 2028, 2032, I don't care, but pick a date. And at some point, you got to let the Chinese market in. You got to make these companies compete, or we're going to turn around and we've got a bunch of, craptastic cars that we're overpaying for, and the whole rest of the world is. Because again, the lesson here from Nissan and Mitsubishi isn't about what they sold in Japan, okay? The lesson is, and same thing with VW and their markets, is that they've lost China, they're losing Europe, they're losing Mexico, they're losing South America. And if we're not careful, Ford sells a lot of vehicles there. And if we are not careful, we're going to turn around because we're putzing around in America. We're going to lose the world. And even if we isolate ourselves, those companies will fail. And it's not about the American market. It's about what's external to us. And
people don't realize. I mean, I think a lot of times Americans are so introspective that they don't realize that these companies are thriving because of external movements in Europe and China and some of those
supply
larger
chain
countries.
diversificate. Yes, man.
I mean, China has 5 times the population of the United States. And
Right.
so being popular in the rest of the world is what helps these companies exist. And can you self-exist? Sure. But when China can do it better and cheaper, then they don't need you. And that's where it gets dangerous on a geopolitical level.
I mean, this is obvious hyperbole and exaggeration, but you don't want to end up like Cuba, or one of these places, right, where the whole world has changed around you, and then you go into Cuba that's isolated and you're driving 1960s Chryslers, right? You don't want to go. There's people that would go into the Eastern Bloc countries, and they would see all these really poorly made vehicles, and that's what America will become if we self-isolate to that point where the whole world's market has changed around us. So I do think we need a date. We need a burning platform that says, listen, OEMs, this is it. Get it together. This is the date you've got to execute by, and we will protect you until then. But get it together, because this is when China is going to be allowed to happen. And if you fail, then I'm sorry, man. That's it.
We need to be
Congratulations,
exporting.
Tesla.
We need to be exporting EVs and not just sitting here trying to figure out how to get our own people to buy the same vehicle.
Well, and the tough part of it is they're playing by the same rules as everybody else when they go to Mexico and build a vehicle. I mean, there's a lot of American companies that are building and using that labor force at a lower price in order to import that vehicle in the United States. So when you make a law that says, well, here it is, and you pass that law, the companies that are building there can change how they do it there and still be able to import under the same regulations because they've done it that differently. And then you look at the financial people that are backing BYD, and you understand that there's a up till what I remember. I don't know if it's still the case, but I know Berkshire Hathaway had a very good position on BYD. They may not,
They
but
do.
I
No, they
remember
do.
they haven't looked at it in a while. So you know that American company is looking to bring them into this market because of that relationship. They just bought out or finished the acquisition of Pilot. I think we talked about this before, Berkshire Hathaway, and Pilot is doing a lot with the charging network as well. So not only are they making a lot of locations for vehicles to charge, but now you have a very large investor in the United States that can also lobby against some of these and has a very good track record of making things successful. So again, whether it is China or not, it's still going to make it here. Most of the equipment that I have on my desk right now is probably mostly Chinese made. So I think the goal of the next administration, and again, we talk to everybody trying because it's going to affect our company as well. What these regulations, what they keep, what they don't keep, the direction they're going with it. For us, we think that some of the money that has not been spent already will be going into, like what Josh said, it's going to go into raw materials. It's going to go into manufacturing instead, and potentially there'll be taxes or different systems put in place. I don't necessarily want to say a tariff, but maybe that would prevent those materials coming into where you're forced to use American products. That's going to make it more expensive. It's going to make the cars more harder to compete if
But
one of those BYDs come in.
you got to set a date though, because the problem is you can't just turn the spigot off of Chinese supply chain and say now get it from America, because
Can't do it.
you guys know what it's like to even build a
Years.
charging station, right? Just to build a
Years.
charging station, to get the transformers, to get the permits, to get the environmental studies, to get the paperwork put in, to get the permits approved, to get it constructed, to get it up and running, right? That's just for the charging station. Now trying to imagine mining and manufacturing something, right?
And
Like
we mine
it,
better and cleaner than anywhere else in the world. So regardless of where this material is coming from, you're hurting the environment more by getting it there than buying it
yeah.
here because we have more regulations than anywhere else in the world. So you're just
And they
putting the mess in somebody else's place if that's the way you look at it.
which we love to do as Americans. We do love to do that, you know. It's
Yeah.
and the Chinese
Cobalt in the
have
Congo. We don't see it. Don't
we don't
worry
see it.
about it.
Yeah, ship all this recycling across the yeah. It's but you're right. BYD is the big, the big elephant in the room. They're the Tesla of China. They're the ones that everybody compares them to. But it's not just them. It's Geely who makes Volvo and Polestar. And that's why you don't see a lot of those Polestars coming to America. It is NIO, it's XPeng, it's Li Auto, Xiaomi, who is like the Apple of China, who
Yep.
just made a remarkable car, man. That's the one Jim Farley
Yeah.
referenced.
That one is
The
fantastic
SU7.
looking.
Dude, that thing is sick. It's just killing
Yeah.
us. We do got to wrap up. I'm running up against time here, but you guys think, man, I think that we got to figure this out, and it's
It's up to
like a
us.
lot. Yeah, we gotta. We'll
Well,
see.
if
We'll see how
you
this all
were
shakes out.
listening, if you're listening to this, I would encourage you comment below
Yeah.
and give us your thoughts. We want to hear what you have to think. There's a lot to say and a lot of different opinions. I mean, we are three people in this space, but we don't know everything. We don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
We don't know who's doing what and when and why. So comment your opinions. And like we said, I mean, there's a space for everyone's opinion, and we think that it's not a clear-cut answer one way or the other. We have to continue to collaborate together, but there does need to be some specific actions to really move that ball forward. But yeah, forward turn down for what? This has been another terrific episode, riveting conversation. We got some really exciting news coming in 2025. Maybe as soon as next week, but probably soon after that. We will be.
Hopefully, we can sneak an episode in. We'll try to sneak an
We'll
episode
sneak
in
one
before
in.
New Year's.
Oh, we're gonna
Yeah.
sneak an episode. I'm saying the exciting news will be announced
Yes.
soon enough. We were
Yeah.
working on it in the background, and we'll be excited to kind of launch that going into 2025. So stay
Heck yeah.
tuned. If you don't, like and subscribe, follow along with our journey and all of our mess and chaos that we get to endure on a weekly basis, and have a terrific and Merry Christmas.
Merry
everyone.
Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas to the families, guys.
Thanks for tuning in to Turn Down for What. Be sure to like and subscribe and turn on notifications for more electrifying content. Stay plugged in, and we'll see you in the next episode.